Okay, so welcome back. We are starting with completely new project, so let's create that project, and we have already learned that. So it's Vue, create, and our application is called to-do app. So I will just name it like that. And when I hit enter, then here, of course, I can pick a preset. I want to manually select the features. I want to select Babel, and I don't want a linter. So I will just click Babel here because we are learning new concepts. We want to learn something new about components. So I will just click here, Babel. And where do I prefer to place a config file? So I will just say I want them to be in the dedicated config files. I don't want to save this preset, and I will click no. So basically right now the new project is being installed, so I will just fast forward this because we already learned this. Okay, now when the project is installed, I can actually open that project inside my IDE. And here's the project, and as you can see here, we have our app component. Here is our main.js file. And as you can see here, the instance of the Vue application is created, and then we are injecting this app component. So the app component is then being rendered as the first component. If we want to run this project, we will open the terminal and we will run npm run serve. And in a few seconds, we will be then able to open our application. Exactly when I hit here, then here is our application. So the first aim is to actually create our first component. So let's try to create our first component. And in order to do that, we will just click here on a source and create new file. And the name of my new component is going to be my component .vue. So the first thing to remember is the extension of this file is called Vue. And I will explain briefly why we are doing that. So when I hit enter, this is now empty file. And as you can see here, my IDE is recognizing that this file here is a Vue component. And that's why you see this Vue icon here. So this is our first component, and let's try to implement it. So every component is let's say the component is a building block of your Vue application. So everything you see on the website is going to be a component. So in order to create a component, you have to define, let's say, 3 different sections. And the first section is called a template section. So when I start writing here, you can see that my IDE is suggesting me to click here, and then this template part is automatically rendered. At the end of the video, I will explain you which plugin you have to install in order to have this. So the first thing of the component is a template. So inside the template, you will write the HTML code that's going to be rendered inside the web browser. The second thing, or the second section of your component, is going to be application logic or component logic. And this is a script part of your application. And the third thing is the stylings or the CSS rules that are going to be applied for your application. And when you start writing style, then you will see here that the style section is added. And believe it or not, this is exactly the thing that you have to write, these 3 things, in order to create your first component. I want to note that if your component doesn't have any logic, then you can also delete this part. But for now, let's keep it like that. And here is the thing that when I mentioned that your component needs to have this Vue extension. By doing that, you are able to write something like this. So by doing this is called single file component. So in this component, in this file, you are defining the design of your component. You are defining the logic, application logic or component logic. And you will also define here a CSS rules that are going to be defined for your component. So let's try to print something from our component. So I will add here a simple h1 tag, hello world, and I will close this. And if I visit now the web browser and if I refresh this page, we will not see our component. Well, that's happening because we never instructed the Vue framework to actually display our component. So in order to do that, let's go to this main.js file. And as you can see here, when the Vue application is starting, the first component we are injecting and the first component that's going to be rendered is this app component. And that's why we are in the browser, we see this here instead of the text that's inside our component. So in order to do that, let's try to inject our component and not this app component. Because my component is in the same level as an app component, I can write here my component .vue, and here I can also write my component. And instead of injecting the app component, I can just inject my component. So I will just copy and paste this. So right now what's happening when the Vue application is starting, the first component that's going to be rendered is this my component, or the component that we just implemented. So if I go back now to the web browser, I will see this hello world text here. That's exactly the text that we printed inside my component. And what I want to do now is I want to delete this app.vue component because I don't need that component. I will work on my own component. So I'll just delete this component. Okay, so for now, everything is good. And the last thing that I want to mention here is if you want to add a bit more text here, let's say I want to add h2 tag. This is our first component. And if I close this h2 tag, then you see here that there is some kind of an error here. And if I go back to the web browser, then you will see that application failed to compile. So what's happening here? Here is the thing you have to remember. If you have multiple elements inside the template tag, so if in my example, I have here h1 tag and then I have h2 tag. If you have these multiple elements, they have to be nested inside a single root element. So what's that? So in order to resolve this problem, let's define a div. Let's close this div. And then let's put this content, these two elements inside this div. And when I save this, what's happening here is I have a template, then I have a single root element, which is this div element, and everything else is inside that element. And this is required by the Vue framework, and you have to do it like that. So if you go now to the website, well, you will see here the hello world, and this is our first component, and this error that we saw previously is not present anymore. And there is another thing that I want to mention here. As you can see here, when I hit enter here a few times, and when I save this component is automatically styled for me. So you can do that by clicking Control-Shift-P, and here you can write workspace settings. And when you click here, this window will open, and then you can search something like format on save, and click here on the user and just check this option here, format of on save, because that will then automatically format your components. The second thing that I wanted to mention here is, as you have seen, when I start typing template here, then I have some kind of autocomplete. That's coming because I installed this vTour plugin inside my Visual Studio Code IDE. And by the way, this Visual Studio Code is free for use. So you can install it and use it for free. So thank you for watching. In the next video, we are going to cover how you can define the data of your component.